Hello, I'm your host, John Cavendish, and welcome to Season 5 of the Amazon Strategist Show. The show that's all strategy with no hacks, no silver bullets, and no magic pills, just real practical strategies to grow your Amazon business. Today, I am joined by none other than Drew Cooper, who's head of sales at Expandly. He's a specialist in international e-commerce expansion with over a decade of experience helping product-based businesses grow across the UK and Europe. He's a regular speaker at webinar on European market entry, and Drew is known for turning dense regulatory detail into practical commercial guidance that helps sellers expand faster, safer, with more predictability. So Drew, welcome to the show.
Oh, John, thank you very much. Great intro. Glad to be here.
Oh, thank you for being here. So, international expansion. So before we get into it, what do we mean by international expansion?
So specifically what we mean is taking your brand outside of your domestic market. So where your company's selling, expanding anywhere else in the world is considered international expansion. Of course, in its truest, rawest sense is to be selling everywhere in the world, and in this case, everywhere where Amazon is present, which is, I don't know the exact percentage, you might be able to tell me, but a large portion of the world, right?
Yeah, a large portion of the world. So what's the biggest market to expand into? Is it US sellers moving to Europe? Is it European sellers moving to the US? Like where do you see the most people doing this?
Okay, so there's some typical steps here. So whilst like the data surrounding the portion of sellers moving cross country, I'm not quite sure what would be the largest stepping stone in terms of percentages, but there are some very, very common movements, ones that make sense really. And typically that sits with US brands coming to Europe, because there's a couple of reasons why that's attractive. One is typically we have the same likes and dislikes to the US. There's similar size markets combined, albeit as far more countries in Europe, of course, but combined they offer the similar opportunity. And it's just a general movement without having to navigate super complex compliance barriers, tax VAT barriers, shipping problems, customs issues. I mean, of course they have, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, some intricate bits which you need to navigate appropriately, but all in all, it's quite a standard movement, and it goes the same for UK and European sellers going to the US. Yeah, it's super familiar. Obviously, English is a commonly spoken language, so therefore it makes that slightly easier when coming over to this side of the pond and vice versa. So yeah, that's just sort of a natural movement really, and it's very sort of common in the Amazon ecosystem for those two to complement each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So when does somebody know that they should look at international expansion?
There's really four things that you need to look at. So the first one is demand for brand. So looking at the feasibility. So is there actually a market? Now, if we're talking from the US to say UK and Europe, for example, if you're selling stars and stripes flags, then you'll probably be pretty confident that it's not going to do particularly well in Europe, right? There's going to be a very small portion of people buying a US flag as an example. So that's sort of the obvious one. But looking at, is there demand for it? So conducting a feasibility study, understanding, as I mentioned, if there's a market, if there's the opportunity for that and market share. And that's the first piece. The second piece is to make sure that you're appropriately resourced for it. One of the most common things I see brands coming over is they tick all of the boxes. We'll come on to the other two in a moment, but they haven't put the resource in place in order to, one, cope with it, with the demand of selling overseas and the complications with it. Also, the dedication of the mindset of where they're selling still remains in their domestic market. So therefore, they don't put the effort into the European piece. And of course, if you don't do that, then same as when you start a new business, if you don't put all of your effort into it, then it's unlikely to be as successful as it was, or even as successful at all. So making sure that you've either got appropriate resource for it, or you're in a position as a brand owner to be able to give it the time and love and attention it needs. The third one is the logistics network, to make sure that you've got a zipped up logistical network. And I don't just mean shipping. I mean, can you attract enough stock? Is your manufacturer able to cope with the demand when it ramps up? You might consider using a different manufacturer. Can you cope with the movement of product from where it's manufactured to a new destination? Do you have the knowledge and skill set, or know somebody with the knowledge and skill set to move product from, say, China to Europe instead of China to the US? And they're different beasts, really. So that's the third thing. And the fourth thing is cash. So have you got the cash flow in order to make that happen? Now, not only are you going to have to invest in the regulatory pieces, so compliance, VAT, and all the services that you're going to need, you're likely to use a service provider for, or at least get some consultancy from, but also the investment in stock, because of course that's going to be quite heavy, and the shipping of that product. Again, one of the key things that I experience is people sending stock over to a market which is of similar size to the US, but sending very little stock, and then not realising that they're stocking out. And of course, we all know the knock-on effects of that has on the ability to be successful. So taking into consideration that's all of those four pieces, lots of little arms and legs coming off of them, John, but those four pieces, in my opinion, are the four core things to take into consideration.
No, I like it. That makes a lot of sense to me. And when you're sharing, what comes to mind for me as well is whether it's certifications or requirements, because Europe has become worse and worse and worse over the last 5 years or decade of like what you need. What comes to mind is like German packaging regulations, CE regulations, things like that. Like how can somebody even do the research of what they need to comply with differently from America to Europe?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The landscape for that has changed significantly, and it continues to on a regular basis. So there are elements of it that you can do yourself. A brand can do this research themselves and carry out those actions in terms of product compliance specifically, or VAT. Those pieces can be done internally. However, I highly recommend that you seek at least some consultancy or support in those areas, because it is changing so much, and the risk to the business is so large that it just isn't worth the risk unless you've got some background in that area. Like, it's just the knock-on effects of it. For instance, having non-compliant product enter the region, if you're fortunate enough to get through customs with non-compliant product, it doesn't just stop there. You've then got the complications with the regulators, with marketplaces who are being heavily held accountable now for ensuring that the products that are going onto their marketplaces are compliant. And if they're not, or they're deemed as not, which is, in fact, there's two pieces here, which I'm going to go sort of on a tangent here. There's two pieces to that. One is that if they're non-compliant, or they're definitely non-compliant, then you run a risk with a regulator or customs clearance, or in fact the marketplace. Or the marketplace, and that's one issue, which means you've got to fix it quickly because it's non-compliant, and the likelihood is you won't be able to sell for a period of time. Second piece is that the marketplace deem it non-compliant, and then you've got to evidence to them that it is compliant. Now, they may deem it non-compliant, we have this a lot, and then you need somebody to represent you in order to be able to tell them, well, actually it is compliant, and we need this overturned immediately because it's stopping sales, or my listings are being damaged because of it. So those two pieces they're different, very similar outcomes, but it's having that knowledge and that expertise in region to be able to fix those problems quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you go into expanding, say you're expanding to Europe, I think, let's make the assumption that most people will be listening to this, selling in the US, expanding to Europe, not necessarily, but potentially, because US is less regulated than Europe, so that's the more difficult one. Would you do all these checks for every marketplace? Would you pick like the big ones? Like, when you advise clients, what do you say? Do you say UK, Germany, or do you say just go for it all and do all the checks?
So, despite the fact that the UK have split from the European Union, we still currently share, in the main, the same regulations. So if we just use expanding as an example of the process, we're checking the regulation. We're not checking the marketplaces individually, because all they do is they take their information from the regulators. So we're checking against European regulations as being a very high level. So what is the mandatory requirement across the whole of the region? If we hit that, then we know that we can stand up to a marketplace or a regulator and fight the corner of the brand. So we know that, providing that the advice has been adhered to, that this product is guaranteed to be compliant.